Test one. Oh, there we go. All right. That was actually pure user error back there. I just forgot to turn it on. So sorry about that. Good to see everyone. Merry Christmas. Hope you are doing well. We're in the middle of a series called Expectant, Not Anxious. To set up what we're going to talk about today, I want to tell you a quick story. Several years ago when Rosanna and I were dating, this is 12 years ago or so, we went on a date to Claim Jumper. Some of you just judged me. I felt it. Nothing says romance like triple portion sizes. So we went to Claim Jumper, and we were at the restaurant, and the waiter comes over to the table and says, "Can I take your order?" And I don't know if I haven't been in a while. They had a burger at the time called the Widowmaker, and I ordered it, which on a date is sort of a bold order if you're with me. And Rosanna, in the moment when the waiter comes, said, that's sort of like it's a big dish. Would you like to split the burger? And in a moment of sheer weakness, I acquiesced. I think I was trying to appear like husband material. Sure, let's split. Like I only want to kill 2 of the 4 chambers of my heart today. Yes, let's split the. Now, just so you know, I do not come from a family where we split portions. That's not how we rolled. Everybody got their own. You sort of, you didn't, that was kind of the deal. And so to split a meal, that was to divide the happiness. That was to divide the amount of joy. But in this particular moment, still, trying to appear like a good boyfriend. Sure, let's split the burger. I tell you that to tell you this. That set a pattern in motion where for the last 12 years, anytime we go to eat, we split the meal. And it's now almost kind of become a running joke between the 2 of us where she's always like, "Why don't you just get your own portion? You always seem sort of passive aggressive when we leave." Even the other night, we were on a date Friday night, and we ordered a burger, and she's like, could anything taste better than this? And I'm like, yes, the other half would actually would be fantastic. And so I tell you that to tell you this. For the last 10 years, I've actually just been hungry constantly. And this is kind of embarrassing, but I actually, if you know me, you know that I always have a Bekind bar in my pocket. Because I am not afraid after the waiter comes, "Can I get you anything else?" I'm not like $14 hungry. I'm like $1.99, but there's that constant, how many of us, you know what I'm talking about, that constant fear, you kind of play that game with yourself, am I full, am I not full? Because you're terrified of 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock hit, and you're stricken with hunger. Some of you have no idea what I'm talking about. Some of you, I have met people, and there's some of you here who say strange things like, "Today got so busy, I forgot to eat lunch." Who are you? What? That has never happened to me. And Rosanna said, I'm like, what do you mean you forgot to, is your sensor, what, did your nervous system shut down? What does that mean? But we want to feel full. There's that longing for fullness, completion that's in us. And this principle that's true in food, it's actually just true everywhere. It's true in anything. If maybe you just got married and you're starting to have that kid conversation. Do we want a child? Do we want 2 children? Or maybe you have 2 kids. Do we want a 3rd kid? There's sort of that question of, is our family full? We're constantly, whether you're a Christian or not, we're evaluating, is this full? Is this complete? Maybe you're an empty nester and you're going into Christmas and there's this sense, you say it to friends, Christmas is a little different this year. Our house just doesn't feel as full. It doesn't feel complete. Maybe you're really good with interior design. I'm not this way, but I have friends like this. They can walk into a room, and you have friends like that. Something is off. And then all of a sudden, they move a vase into the room. They're like, that did it. It's complete. It's full. We're constantly evaluating, is this full? Is this complete? And I want to talk today about a God who wants you to feel a sense of completion, fullness, wholeness, and how Christmas and how we can begin to live with a sense of expectancy that our God is a God who understands fullness. If you have a Bible, you can turn with me to Mark chapter 12 is where we're going to begin. If you don't have a Bible, that's okay. You can follow along on the screens or download the Church at RB app. And I'm going to be bouncing around quite a bit in the Bible, not on stage, hopefully. If you just want to follow along on the screens, that would be okay. Mark chapter 12. Now, this is a famous passage of Scripture. We read this a lot. In fact, we just finished an 8-week study on this particular verse of the greatest commandment. But God says something, Jesus says something at the outset of the greatest commandment that is kind of bizarre, and we typically read past it to get to sort of the meat of it. But I want us to look at this together. Mark chapter 12, starting in verse 28. If you get hungry at any point, I have a Bekind bar in my back pocket that you can have. Just kidding, you cannot have it. Mark chapter 28. Of all the commandments, which is the most important? This question is posed to Jesus. You probably heard this before. The most important one, answered Jesus. And here's the bizarre part, is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is, what's the word? Is one. Love the Lord your God, and then we kind of move past that into this. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. The second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. And that's sort of our entire theology around being a good neighbor. But he starts this with this idea, this announcement of, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. That's sort of a bizarre thing to say. Now, what Jesus is doing here is he's actually quoting from the book of Deuteronomy. And there's a prayer that Jesus, the disciples, any good God-fearing Hebrew Jewish person would start their day with this particular prayer. It was called the Shema. And the Shema was this, you'd begin your day this way, you'd end your day this way. And it was this announcement that started, it was this prayer that started, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Now, what does that mean? God is one. We would describe, all of us, there's Trinity, we sing about this. God is Father, He's Spirit, He's Son. But if I said if God is one, you would say, well, yeah, He's unified. There's a sense of oneness to God, but this is central. God is one. Maybe another way to think about it, because it's kind of a thick concept, you could think of it, about it this way. If God was an In-N-Out burger, some of you just started paying attention. Honey, wake up. This has your name all over it today. I almost went with Chick-fil-A, but I realized it was blasphemous to have Chick-fil-A on Sunday, so I just was like, no. So if God was an In-N-Out burger, you could say he's lacking nothing. Like, there's no onion rings missing. I'll let you theologically decide if he's animal style. There's no pickles, no salt. Nothing is missing from God. He's complete. He's whole. There is no absence from, like, have you ever bitten into something, like your favorite thing, and you're like, wait a second, something is off with this. It's not the way it's supposed to be. God's not that way. He's exactly the way that he should be. We might describe him as perfect, and that's certainly a word for it, but at a deeper level, it's one. God is whole. God is complete. Now, the reason that matters is because you are made in the image of this God, which means deep in your bones, whether you are a Christian or not, there is a longing for oneness. There is a longing for completeness, a longing for wholeness, longing for fullness. Think about the phrases that we use when things are not the way they're supposed to be. We might say about somebody, well, she comes from a broken home. What do we mean? Not complete. You might describe a friend who's gone through difficult circumstances. Maybe she's a widow. Well, how is she doing? Well, she is just trying to what? To pick up the pieces of her life and begin again. You might describe circumstances where something has happened in your own life. And if I said, tell me what happened, you might describe a traumatic event in such a way where you'd use phrases like, well, when that happened, it was like a piece of me died. It was like when that relationship ended, when that person did that, it was like a part of me. It just died. Pieces of me died in that moment. You might describe your favorite sports team when things are going well. Well, they seem to be playing as one. When they don't win, you might say something like, well, the whole thing kind of fell apart at the end there, didn't it? This sense of oneness and longing, it's in the Garden of Eden. God creates a world where Adam, this whole thing, we might describe it as perfect, but it's whole, it's one, it's complete. God, Adam are one. Adam and Eve, when they get married, the first wedding ceremony, God declares the two shall become, what's the word? One. Yes, if you're married, you should know that. This two shall become one. This is central all throughout the scriptures, again and again and again. Now, there's a word for this longing for oneness that appears all throughout the Bible, New Testament, Old Testament, and it's this word that I want to look at today, and it's the word shalom. Shalom. Let me hear you say shalom on the count of 3. Not yet. I admire your energy. 1, 2, 3. Well done. Shalom. Shalom to you. There's this, when I ask, what does shalom mean? You would probably say, well, it's a greeting. It's hello. At a deeper level in the scriptures, when that word shalom in Hebrew is there, it gets translated as peace. And at a certain level, it does mean that. That's a good translation. But we would often describe peace as the absence of conflict. That there's not fighting here. That's peace. Shalom is actually much deeper than that. This sense of shalom, you could define shalom this way. It's wholeness. It's flourishing. It's the way things are supposed to be. Is how a lot of theologians would describe shalom. This is exactly the way God intends. This is exactly, this is how it's supposed to be. That's in the positive. You could describe shalom in the negative this way. We're always looking for definitions to things as Christians. So when it comes to the concept of sin, well, how do you define sin? That's sort of a slippery slope. If I lie to you, just outright bold lie, well, of course, we'd all say, well, that's a sin. But if I withheld some information from you or just sort of didn't tell you something that you might, well, it becomes sort of a slippery slope. There's a theologian named Cornelius Plantinga, which, by the way, that's just a great name. He describes shalom, or he describes, I think this is sort of a helpful definition of what happens when there's not shalom. He says this, God hates sin, not just because it violates his law. In other words, not because it's bad. We often say we shouldn't sin because that's bad, but more substantively because it violates shalom. It breaks the peace. It interferes with the way things are supposed to be. In short, sin is culpable disturbance of shalom. It's something has happened to tear it apart the way it's supposed to be. So you could think of sin or any sort of act against God. You could think of it this way. So this is God, and we'll just go ahead and say this is you right here. And sin is when there's disturbance of the way things are supposed to be. So what does sin do? It it divides, it desecrates what is supposed to be whole and beautiful. It takes away, how many of us, you've sat down to eat a meal and somebody said, hey, oh, that looks good. Can I have a bite out of that? You're like, no, I don't care if you're my child. That's not the way it's supposed to be. So what does sin do? It divides, it separates, it all of a sudden makes something that was supposed to be whole and good, it breaks it, it tears it apart. And then you die. So think about like a lie. We would all say, well, you shouldn't lie. Why? Well, because lying's bad. Yes, but at a deeper level, what does a lie do? A relationship, the way it's supposed to be, is trust between you and I. And if I lie, what have I done? I have divided, I have broken apart the foundation of trust. Now I've sort of left it in pieces, haven't I? If I gossip about you, what have I done? Well, there was trust. You believed what I said to you was just between the two of us. And then I gossiped, so I triangulated. I brought this person or this person or this person. You might even say about somebody who gossiped, well, she's two-faced. What have they done? They've divided the trust. At one level, it's bad, yeah, but at a deeper level, it's broken apart shalom. It's torn apart the way things are supposed to be. An affair. We'd all say, well, yeah, you shouldn't do that. Why? Well, it's wrong. Well, at a deeper level, it's taken this foundation of trust, what's supposed to be one, and it's divided it and now invited this third person into it. It takes apart. Shalom is how it's supposed to be. Sin, it's cold. Like I've participated in the disturbance of how it's supposed to be. Now, that's a very spiritual definition of shalom. There's also all throughout the scriptures unspiritual definitions of how shalom works. In the book of Joshua, chapter 8, God commands Joshua, he's the guy that sort of follows after Moses, to build this temple. And he says, when you build this temple, I want you to build it a particular way. Verse 31 of Joshua, chapter 8, verse 31. He says, when you build it, he built it according to what was written in the book of the law of Moses. This is how you are to build the altar. An altar of what kind of stones? Uncut stones on which no iron tool had been used. So God values integrity. This word for uncut, it's this word shalom, it's shalom essentially. Don't put a knife. I want them to be whole. I want them to be pure because God is a God who's one. He wants things to remain the way they are intended to be. And there's this longing, whether you have ever stepped foot in church before or not, for shalom. It's everywhere. It's in everything. When I take my kids every Friday, I don't know why I do this, but I pick my kids up from school on Friday. I take them to get ice cream. I know why I do that. But when I order the ice cream, they place their order and I go over to the counter to pay. When they hand me the ice cream cone, there is some instinctual father paternal thing where I take a bite out of every ice cream cone. I didn't say I was a good father, I'm just telling you what I do. And my kids, every time, and the guy at the counter is the same guy, right? He's like, why do you do that? My kids, they're like, Dad, I can't. They're essentially saying, there is no shalom to my cone. This is not the way it's supposed to be. And this longing, you sense it, you feel it, you smell it, it's always there in anything. Is this the way it's supposed to be? Now, why in the world do I tell you all this? Because the promise of Christmas, the prophets would speak about a king who is going to come. They were expectant, and this is 700 years before Jesus arrives, that a king, a Messiah, was going to come, and he was going to have this ability to bring shalom into the world. This is one of the most famous, iconic Christmas passages that there is. Isaiah chapter 9, starting in verse 6. You've probably read this before, or you've seen it written in that card that you bought at Hallmark and you mailed to your mother-in-law. It says this, verse 6 of Isaiah chapter 9, "For to us a child is born, to us," and this was the expectation, "to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called," how many of us have heard this before? "Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." Now that word there for peace, what do you think it means? Shalom, yes. He's not going to bring an absence of conflict, well, at a certain level, but at a deeper level, he's going to reconcile all things. He's going to bring things that have been broken and put them back together. People, relationships, creation, all things will be reconciled in this Christ, this Messiah who will come. So the expectation that the people of God had and the expectation that the people of God should have in this world in the 21st century is a Prince of Peace, a Prince of Shalom who can show up in our lives and in these moments. In the age of anxiety, might it be important that we call on the Prince of Shalom in our world? Might you find yourself in need of a God who can put some broken pieces back together in your life? Now, I want to show you, because that can be very esoteric and sort of vague and philosophical, but at a practical level, especially when you find your spirit anxious and not sure what to do, how this Prince of Peace, how Jesus actually works. If you turn with me to the New Testament, the book of Luke, chapter 10, this is what it's like when the Prince of Shalom enters into the room. It says that Jesus, he comes to this town, and there's these two sisters, Mary and Martha. We often use this phrasing, if you've been hanging around church for a while, are you a Mary, or are you a Martha? And it sort of describes one who's sort of busy, the other one who's contemplative, but there's something deeper going on here. Verse 38 of Luke chapter 10, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened up her home to him. She had a sister called Mary. And notice what Mary's doing, who sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he said. But Martha, verse 40, was distracted. How many of you're like, yeah, I'm with Martha. I get that. By all the preparations that had to be made. So it sort of feels like it's Christmas morning, but that doesn't really work. She came to him and asked, I love this. This is Martha. Lord, don't you care that Mary, my sister, has left me to do all this work by myself? Tell her to help me. And Jesus responds, verse 41, Marcia, Marcia, Marcia. So bad. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are what? What's the word? You are and upset about many things. Of course I am. There's all this stuff to do. There's all these things to get done. And Mary's lazy, for crying out loud. Of course, she's worried. Now, this word for worried, we think of that as, well, I have an emotion of worry. I have a feeling of worry. But in the Greek, this word worry, when Jesus uses this word, which he does several times, is this word marinmos. And the word is not the important part, but the definition really is. Worried means to be divided into parts. So he's essentially declaring in this moment, Martha, Martha, why are you divided into parts? Why are you spread amongst all these things to do? I think most of us in this room, you've had feelings, you've had emotions. Maybe it's never been clinical or diagnosed, but there's feelings of anxiety that grip you, maybe especially this time of year. And there's this sense, if I asked you, we'll describe it, what does it mean to be anxious? We would sort of struggle for a definition. Some of us would say it's emotional, others would say psychological. Some of us, you maybe even describe it as physiological. Your body is responding in those moments where you're anxious and stressed. But all of us, the common denominator in all of our anxiety, isn't it true? When you're anxious, you have a hard time being fully present where you actually are. Are you with me? You can't seem to be fully present where you are when you're anxious. Your mind is racing, thinking through all the things to do, all the things that you haven't gotten done. And so you find yourself, the way it sort of works for me, I'll be in a moment and my kids will say, Dad, can you help me with my homework? And Rosanna and I have noticed, the boys, when they ask me a question they've learned, the next time you ask Dad the question, you got to say it like 15 octaves higher because he never hears you the first time. Because when you ask him, chances are Dad is in the room, but he may not be in the room. His mind is somewhere else. Or maybe your wife says to you, honey, can you tell me, take out the trash? Honey, can you help me take out the trash? Honey, are you listening? You're like, what'd you say? I wasn't listening. You sort of learn to go through life divided into parts. And so what begins to happen and what anxiety begins to do in the spirit is you find yourself, how many of us, you know, maybe this is actually happening to you right now. Like you're here, but you're thinking through that thing at work that you've got to do Tuesday. You're thinking through that noise that your car's been making. You're thinking through that weird sensation you've been getting in your little toe, and should you WebMD it? Probably not, because if you do, it'll say you'll be dead in a week. Why has my son been wearing black all the time? Is he depressed? What has been going, the 3 emails that you haven't responded to, the 14 things that you've got to buy, and why has your boss been calling you more and more on Saturday? And your mind, all of a sudden, you find yourself in a moment, but you're not really there. You're divided into all these parts, and your head and heart is somewhere else. How many of us? Yeah, of course. Why, Martha, are you divided into parts? Or you may say, Jared, that's actually not the issue at all. There's one thing that's been driving me crazy, and it's my husband, it's my job, and that one thing, what it's done to your mind is actually splintered it and dissipated your energy into all these directions, because you're constantly, because of that one thing, thinking through in this moment, well, what about if I did this, would that make this better? Or if I didn't do this, would that make it worse? And should I tell this person? Should I bring this person in? And you're thinking through all these scenarios around this particular, and that one thing has actually just been like this knife that has severed you and split you into all these parts. Or you may, how many of us, you've said recently, I can't take one more thing going wrong because if it does, I'll go crazy. I know we're in church, but be honest. Yeah, of course. Or maybe you've used this phrase, when that happened, it was like the straw that broke the camel's back. What do we mean by that? What we mean is it's not the one thing that happened, it was the one thing plus the 15 other things or 15,000 other things that caused me to have a breakdown in that moment. Or maybe you would describe your tension, your anxiety currently, it's relational. Like you may say, well, there's only so much of me. I only have so much time, so much energy. And yet this person is trying to take a piece, and this person at work, and your wife is wondering, when are we going to actually spend some time together? Your kid wants to know, can we throw the ball? Can we hang out? This person's asking for a meeting. This person's asking for more. And you sort of feel like one cheeseburger trying to feed 4,000 people. How many of us? And it's like I'm divided into all these parts. And notice the Prince of Shalom, when he's in this moment with Mary and with Martha, what his response is to this feeling of anxiety that Martha has. He does not say, Mary, worship service over, go help Martha. Notice this is his response, and these words, cling to them, let them give life to you. Let them remind you, especially in the Christmas season. Verse 42, he says, Martha, Martha, the answer, you're worried about so many things, but few things are needed, Martha. Few things are, have you heard the Prince of Shalom say, few things are actually that important. And then he says this, or indeed only what? Only, is it on the? Yeah, there it is. What's wrong with you? Or indeed only one. Only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. In other words, he says, Martha, I'm not going to tell Mary to get up and be a stressed, anxious, fretting mess like you are. Because the trick to finding peace, the trick to experiencing this grace, the mercy, the love of God, the peace of God in our life, the trick is to block out all the distractions, all the things that are currently dividing you into parts, to find yourself in the presence of the Prince of Peace, to sit at the feet of the Prince of Peace, the one place, the one voice who can actually cut through all the noise of your life and say everything is going to be fine. The trick, the harder thing to do, is to block out, tune out everything else so you can actually, when was the last time you found yourself at the feet of Jesus saying, or really what Mary's doing in this moment, is listening to the Prince of Peace say over you, it's all going to be okay. The problem of anxiety is it pulls us into all these parts where we can no longer hear the one thing that we actually need to hear. And the scriptures say there's actually a reason for this. There is a devil that is at work in this world. And we often think of the devil, well, red horns, Vegas, drugs, sex, rock and roll. Well, yeah, at a certain level, there's that. But the devil's work, again and again, he's called the accuser. He bombards, he sends multitudes of thoughts and images. And his goal, yes, drugs, sex, rock and roll, all that. But his goal is to get you so distracted, to get you so divided, to get you so busy where you can't pay attention to the things that you actually need to hear that could actually bring wholeness and fullness and a sense of joy into your life. There's this great passage in Mark chapter 5. It's this guy named the Gadarene demoniac. And it says in the scriptures, he's gone insane. He's screaming day and night. And nobody knows what to do. Everybody's avoiding him. And Jesus shows up with his 12 disciples, and they're sort of looking at him like, why don't you go talk to him, boss? And Jesus goes up to the man, and this is the conversation that they have. This man who's possessed by demons, he says, Jesus asked him, verse 9 of Mark chapter 5, what is your name? And I'm assuming the man's name is Frank or Bill or whatever. And he says, my name is Legion. These are the demons speaking. He replied, for we are what? We are many. He doesn't say my name is Legion and my favorite holiday is Halloween. We are a multitude, and it's the multitude that is driving him insane. It's the many. And what does Jesus do? He casts the legion out and he makes him whole. He brings a sense of oneness. He brings a sense of healing. This God, the Prince of Peace, who reconciles all things. The enemy's plan is to get you so distracted, so bombarded, so confused, disoriented, so many things going on that you don't know what you should actually pay attention to. And you find yourself like Martha, sort of scattered and sort of fretting, and you don't have any room in your heart and soul to sit at the feet of Jesus like Mary and hear the voice that you actually need to hear. The one voice, the one person who can actually begin to reconcile all things, put you back together. There is an actual devil, there's an actual enemy at work in our world. And I know for some of you, maybe you hear that and you think, I was with you until you said devil. I can't check the box on that. How in an iPhone Google world can people actually believe in demons and maybe you believe some of the teachings of Jesus? Well, if you don't bite on the idea of a devil or a Satan, a couple of things. You cannot make sense of the rest of the Bible without believing in that. If you sort of punt on that idea, the rest of the scriptures really fall apart. The second thing I would say is you are a part of a small group of people in the scope of history who do not believe in a devil or a Satan. Most of all people throughout all of human civilizations have believed there is a source for evil at work in this world. You're a part of most of them live in Southern California or New York, but you're a part of a small group of people who don't believe in that idea. And maybe it's somewhat fair to punt on the idea of red horns, that whole concept of evil. But there is a source for evil, and his path, his plan for you is to just like this Gadarene, to make you insane, to go crazy. It's very similar. There was a book written several years ago, actually about 400 years ago. It was by a guy named John Bunyan. He had a brother named Paul. And John Bunyan lived in the 1600s. And he wrote probably one of the most classic works of the last millennium, a book called Pilgrim's Progress, where he describes the journey of this man named Christian headed to a holy city and all the obstacles that he faces. But he wrote a book right after that was sort of an addendum to it. It was called The Holy War, around the year 1682. And in The Holy War, and Bunyan was really the C.S. Lewis or the J.R. Tolkien of his time, where all of his characters in the story and the places in the story would be metaphors for something else. And in the Holy War, it takes place in the city called Mansoul, which is an image for man's soul. And there's a character in the story named Mr. Conscience. And Mr. Conscience is a watchman for the city. He's a picture of your conscience. And he alerts the city of Mansell when there's danger. He screams, awake, 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 we have a problem. And the city would wake up and they would fight against Diablo, so the devil in this story. And over time in the story, what happens to Mr. Conscience, Diablos comes to destroy him. Not by killing him, but by poisoning him and making him go insane. And all of a sudden, what begins to happen to Mr. Conscience over the story is that he begins to scream, awake, 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 when there is no danger, and he falls asleep when there actually is. And that's actually how the enemy works more subtly in our lives. He begins to get you to pay attention to all the things that don't really matter, so you can no longer sit at the feet of Jesus, who actually does matter. And hear the Prince of Shalom, of peace, say to you, you are going to be fine. And so this Christmas, this year, next year, all the days that you have breath, may you find yourself. You say, what do I do with that? How do I live with that? Well, you begin to find yourself like Mary, sitting at the feet of Jesus again and again and again. And when you do, you begin to not just chatter. That's typically how my prayers go. I'm just chattering to Jesus. And there's a benefit to that, but you begin to hear. When you hear Jesus, and I don't mean in an audible voice, but he speaks through his word. He speaks through friendships. He speaks, and you begin to hear his voice to you. And he begins to remind you of truth that you desperately need in your anxious heart and anxious spirit when you're divided into parts. You'll hear the voice of Jesus say what he says in Colossians 2, verse 9. You have been brought to fullness in Christ Jesus. I love that. This theme is all throughout the New Testament. Paul, again and again, you have been made complete. You are being carried to completion. You are full in the presence of Jesus. And you may go through life feeling fragmented and broken and in all these different pieces. But if you cling to the cross, you have been brought to fullness. You are essentially a lot like the moon. You look up at the moon and it has its 8 phases, and there's times, this drives my 3-year-old crazy, by the way, because he always thinks the world is ending because he looks up and the moon is in different phases. And oftentimes you see the moon. You go, well, where is it? Just because you don't see it or feel it or sense it doesn't mean that it's not complete and full. And you may be going through life feeling like a waxing crescent right now. But you're actually full and whole, and you need to find yourself at the feet of Jesus, hearing the Prince of Peace, Prince of Shalom, declare over you, you have been reconciled, you are whole and full. Oftentimes, when I find myself in these moments of anxiety, fretting, you show up with a sense of expectancy to the feet of Jesus. And through grace, what he'll do is he will pinpoint the things in your life, the sins in your life that are tearing you apart and making you broken. And the sources of anxiety that you have because you don't feel whole. And because you're a Christian, you long for wholeness. You long for a sense of integrity in your life. And Jesus, through his grace and truth, will show you what's dividing you. And you need that to have peace in your life. The word integrity, we often think of that, well, he tells the truth, she doesn't tell the truth. But integrity, it comes from the Latin word integer, which just means one. And when there's not oneness in our life, in our behavior, when we're this person to this person, or people don't know this about us, it's one of the powerful things about confession is it makes us one. It makes us whole. It brings integrity. Jesus Christ will be faithful to show you what it is that's dividing you in your heart and spirit and causing the anxiety. He's the Prince of Peace. Oftentimes, maybe you find yourself today coming into church and you feel like there's all these broken pieces to your life and you're not quite sure what to do with them. Maybe 2019 just ripped you apart. Maybe there was a move. Maybe there was a death. There was circumstance. You don't quite know what to do with all this. And the cross says, our God is the God who takes the broken things and turns them into beautiful things. Are you with me? Our God is the God who can take the things that we don't know what to do with the broken pieces of our life, and he can turn them into beautiful things. That's actually what the cross does. Paul says about the cross, when you come into the shadow of the cross, you come into the presence of the cross reconciles all things. It brings all things in heaven and on earth together, including you. Christ wants to reconcile you through the cross, by the cross. You stand in the shadow of the cross. You see the broken pieces can be turned into beautiful pieces. The most broken image the world had ever known until Jesus died on it was the cross. It was a symbol of war and massacre, and Jesus takes the most broken, the worst thing, and turns it into the most beautiful thing, the very instrument by which God's love will flow into this world. And he can do the same in the broken pieces of our lives. When you sit at the feet of the Prince of Shalom, maybe you just need to cling to the cross today. That's what he wants you to do, to be made whole. We're going to sing this song together about who our God is and what our God does, and may you experience the grace and the peace of Jesus, my friends.